Hey everybody, welcome to another HH Chat. We are so excited to be here with Ann Handley, and I am really excited to introduce you guys to her. For those of you who don't know, but I'm almost sure that everybody does, but just in case, Ann is the head of content here at MarketingProfs, author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Everybody Writes, which I'm excited to talk more about here today. It says in her Twitter handle she's waging the war on mediocrity and content, so I'm sure we can hear a little bit more about that. Real quick, I wanted to make sure that we let you know that this is ongoing now. It's at every Monday on at noon Pacific Standard Time. And the other thing I wanted to do is make sure that we thanked our sponsors real fast. It's Cisco, Cox Communications, IBM, Influitive, Freshdesk, Hootsuite, Neustar, MasterCard, Mutual Mind, Speakeasy, so you can rest medicine. So, welcome to H2H Chat, and alongside this, you can be tweeting at hashtag H2HChat. Susie is on there taking your questions. The second half of this, we will be taking questions from you to Ann. So please make sure that you put all your questions up. I'm sure there's a lot of things that we can talk about here, as it has to do with both writing and creating shareable content. So, hi, Ann. How are you doing?
How are you, Brian? Happy to be here.
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And well, first of all, I finally get a chance to interview you on your book. We've been talking about this for quite some time, and I'm thankful to be sitting here talking to you about Everybody Writes and the process that you went through of writing a book about everybody writing.
That sounds so meta, doesn't it? And you just wrote a book, right? So I'm talking to you about how everybody writes, and you just wrote.
So everyone on video writes right now. So one of the things that I've always liked is the way that you look at things. You kind of tend to turn them sideways and upside down, and just different ways that you look at things and how you approach them. And so I was just curious, and I think a lot of people would love to hear what your intention was. If you were standing in the middle of a bookstore and you're telling everybody about your book, what would you tell them?
What would I tell everybody about my book? So Everybody Writes is a book about, as it says, writing, because I feel like in our content social world, everybody is a writer. Businesses and organizations are charged with telling their story to connect with the people they want to reach. Even before any of those people speak to their sales staff, the research has been out there for a number of years now. And so as much as content has become at the heart of marketing, I think the conversation that's been missing, or at least that I felt that was missing, was the idea that writing is really the heart and the liver and the lungs and the soul of content. So that's one piece of it. The other side of it is just from a personal level. I feel like, based on my conversations with lots of people that I talk to, people tend to very often they have an uncomfortable relationship with writing. They don't consider themselves writers. Yet, I don't think of writing as something that's reserved for, a chosen few who can do it incredibly well. Those people are called novelists or journalists or essayists. Instead, I think it's a basic skill that we as communicators in marketing all need to have, all businesses need to have. And so I really wanted to both, empower people to up their game, to lose the idea of mediocre content, as you started out talking about. But secondly, to sort of get people excited about it and really feel empowered to create better content, to create better things, to not waste their audience's time, and to really create stuff that was a little bit inspired. So, it's part how-to and also part inspiration. Is really the way I pitched this the way I thought.
It's interesting because there's a lot of content out, and there's been a lot of people that have commented and written about this, but there's more content than ever, obviously. What's your take on how to kind of rise to the top, how to break out of all this, as Mark Schaefer calls it, the what is it, the Content Shock?
Content Shock, yeah. And Mark has a fantastic new book about content as well, called The Content Code. My take on it is that good content, ridiculously good content, as I talk about in Everybody Writes, is table stakes. I mean, I feel like you've got to be producing content as a cornerstone of your marketing. And then, then we can talk about, where do you go from there? How do you make something shareable? How do you make it ignite? But ultimately, I think really, good content is table stakes. I think everybody has to be producing content as a cornerstone of their marketing, of telling their story, of getting the word out, trying to reach the folks you want to reach. So is there a lot of it? Yeah, but I mean, in my mind, that just means that it just ups the game that much more. It just means that you do need to really do the best you can when it comes to creating your own.
What do you do what's your process for getting an idea down on paper?
It's funny that you asked this, because I'm just in the middle of writing a post about that now. I keep my process, I use about 6 or 7 tools. I was thinking about this with every single piece of content I put out there, whether it's a blog post or a book. I mean, it's a little bit more involved when it comes to a book, but just take a basic blog post. I keep a running list of ideas with a notebook that I have, in a notebook that I always have with me. It's right here. You guys can see that. This is one that I carry around with me all the time. It's always right beside me. And I just, if I hear something on the radio or I read something, I just, sort of make a note in there. If anybody else were to read this, it looks like, a grocery list for like, somebody who's high on crack or something like that. It makes no sense, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So that's the first step, and then from there, I'll do a little bit of research on Google to see if something has legs. I'll throw some notes up on Trello to sort of schedule it. When it gets to Trello, that means it's actually going to be a blog post. It's moved from Field Notes into Trello. I'll gather some research via Google and hold that in Pocket. I'm sure you know that app. And then I start writing. I use Word to write, and when I'm putting together a post or anything, I typically start with another kind of laundry list or grocery list. Just making some notes about my main points that I want to make, and then flesh it out from there. The most important part of my process, though, I would say, is the point where I get a post done, and then I walk away. I leave it for, I don't know, say, a day if I can. I very rarely write and publish on the same day, because in my mind there's a sort of maturation that goes on almost magically. Like when you buy bananas at the grocery store and they're not ripe enough yet, so you can put them in a paper bag and they'll ripen faster. That process. I feel like that's what I do with my content. I take any post I'm writing and I just sort of leave it on the counter for about a day or so, and then when I come back to it, I don't know whether my thinking has matured or whether something magic happens on the page, but it always feels like I know exactly what the main point is, I know what the headline is, I know where I'm going. I mean, I sort of walk into it knowing the general direction, but just taking that space and going back and editing it, after a day, to me, that's the biggest, it's the most important piece of anything that I publish, because there's so much that comes out after the fact that isn't there the first time. It feels very ripe and it feels very raw the first time. The second time it feels ripe.
So I noticed you didn't say Evernote. We had a conversation about that in New York, and
yes.
There's a little bit of an inside joke there. And one day we'll have that conversation again on how to use it. But
I try so hard. I try so hard to use Evernote. Everybody says to me all the time, "You've got to use Evernote. It's the best thing ever. It's the best place where you can collect." I can't handle it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I try, and it's like it's like the way that I felt about Swiss chard when I was a kid. It's like my grandfather had a garden. My mom would bring it home and she would cook it. I'd be like, I still don't like it. These many years later, I still don't like it. So I don't know. I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong or why I like it, but it just does not work. It feels like there are two kinds of people in the world too. It's like people who love Evernote and people who hate Evernote. They're like crops in that way. It's like people love them or they hate them. But anyway, I don't know. I know you use Evernote. You're a big fan of it.
I do, but I know that there's not one process.
Right.
Everyone has a different process for everything that they do to write, and some people even co-write or co-create.
Yeah.
so many different approaches to getting that out right now. But you know, I don't know. For me, it's like it hits me in a store or somewhere, like or in a moment where I'm just like, whoa, that would be a really good blog, and I need something, whatever it is, just to write something down, just to remember it, because I will forget.
Yeah, right. That's my issue too. It's like I'm constantly like thinking of ideas, and then but you know what I learned prior to writing Everybody Writes actually is that you know I would think of it, and then that night I'd be like, what was that I was gonna do? Wait. It's gone. So that's why I started religiously just writing everything down. I just came home about half an hour ago, and I actually pulled over on the side of the road on the way here because I heard something on the radio, and I was just like, you know, that's a good idea. It was just a fragment of a quote, but I was like, that's cool. So I think training your ear to hear that as a content creator and just having the discipline or at least the opportunity to write it down is half the battle.
So what do you think makes content exceptional? You said it's table stakes, but what makes it stand out? What makes it better? What makes a great piece, a great article stand out right now?
I mean, just there's no one way to write, right? So there's no one thing that's going to make any piece of content stand out. I mean, really what makes anything stand out is the fact that the audience loves it, right? And so what that means is it's got to be very audience-centric in its point of view. I feel like there's a lot of companies out there who know that. Intellectually, they know that they've got to be writing to please their customers and not their boss or their CEO or their client. But in reality, that doesn't happen as often as you would think, as is suggested. So I think ultimately, you know, the best content is what your audience wants or needs or loves. You know, I talk about this all the time, but you know, what would your audience thank you for? You know, that's typically what you need to be writing. And then how you write it, I think, you know, last week I was at Emma's event, Emma the email company's event in Nashville. It's a fantastic event, by the way. It was their inaugural event. It was really awesome. But I was talking about tone of voice and the importance of having a point of view, you know, using your voice as a way to tell a different kind of story. So not just, you know, not just what you say, but how you say it. And I think, you know, if you can hone that tone of voice, you know, as a writer on behalf of a company, I think that's incredibly. And that's not an opportunity that I see a lot of companies taking. It's really hard, you know, to find a company that has such a strong tone of voice that if you were to cover up the logo and everything else identifying on a web page and say, like, yes, I know who wrote that, you know, that's the holy grail. But there's not a lot of companies where I think that's true.
How have you seen how have you seen content change, and where do you think content will go?
Wow, that's a big question. You know, when CC Chapman and I wrote Content Rules 5 years ago, you know, I thought then, like, wow, content is so advanced right now. I mean, CC and I would joke as we were writing that book, you know, doesn't everybody already know all this stuff already, and isn't this obvious? But, you know, it reminds me of that old saying, you know, what's obvious to you isn't obvious to everybody else. So, you know, I think back then the idea that content was a cornerstone of your marketing, or should be, you know, at the center of your marketing, that was a little bit radical for a lot of companies, which you know, it surprised me really when we wrote it, but you know, just based on the reception and so on, it turned out to be true. So I think now, you know, we've stopped. That was a book, in other words, that talked about, you know, why content. I think we're past the why, and I think we're more into the how, which is a much more interesting place to be in. Just because it really does involve, you know, really creating stuff that's pretty awesome, and that's truly where my heart is. That's what I love to talk about and what I love to help people do. So I think we're definitely there. You know, where we're going in the future. I think, you know, some of the things we've been talking about, you know, having companies really think about identifying that tone of voice and really pushing it that much further. You know, telling different kinds of stories, not just the same stories that their competitors are telling. So all those kinds of things I think we're going to start to see in you know, in the next couple of years. I mean, the tools and the technology, that's always changing. You know, it's been changing forever. It's you know, that's always, I think, part of who we are as publishers. But you know, to me, that's just a way of telling a story. I think to me, ultimately, what really it comes down to is telling that story, and it doesn't matter where you're telling it, it's just coming up with it and telling it in a way that's truly reflective of who you are.
So it's kind of interesting because MarketingProfs is you on Twitter, and
yes.
and so I think it's funny all the time when people write or tweet to MarketingProfs and they're either tweeting to you or you follow on a list as both yourself and MarketingProfs.
Yeah,
and
right.
It's both you, and so I guess my question there is, how do you think that would work for another organization? I mean, you've personalized, you've humanized, I should say, a brand around a person,
right?
And I love it. I think it's such a wonderful way to market. But why aren't more organizations doing that?
It's so funny because I actually have. I don't think it's such a great idea for companies to have their personality around a single person, and I mean, I'll tell you why. Because when I first started MarketingProfs as MarketingProfs on Twitter, I was very much under the radar. You know, this was like 7 or 8 years ago, when Twitter was such a different place. You know, it was quieter, and you know, I had the Twitter handle for, I don't know, about 1.5 years, I think, before any of my colleagues here at MarketingProfs even noticed. You know, and it wasn't like I was trying to pull something over on anybody by any stretch. It was just that, you know, Twitter wasn't considered a significant channel, you know, for such a long period of time. It was very much in the backwater. So, so I went on there really as a point of experimentation, like, you know, what should I be doing on here? Should MarketingProfs be on here? And it's like, well, all right, I guess I'll try this out. For a long time, I had the bird logo as my avatar on there, even though I was always tweeting as Ann Handley. So there was a little bit of tension in, like, what are we going to do with this? And then eventually I started realizing that, you know, my personality can help grow this Twitter channel. And so just as you suggested, that human piece of it really was important to it.
You said the word human, and so I have to do this.
That's awesome. But I don't know. I don't know that I would do that again. You know, like if I were starting the MarketingProfs Twitter handle right now, I don't think that it would just be me. You know, and as much as I would say that I do think that having it just me has, ironically, you know, really helped grow the brand and so on. You know, what happens if I get, you know, I'm just about to say this, what if I get hit by a bus, you know, tomorrow? Or, I don't know, what if the rest of the company suddenly votes me off the island or something like that? You know, what happens to the Twitter handle? I think it's a little bit dangerous for a company to wrap it around a single personality, a single person. I think there's a way to convey that humanity without tying it to a single individual, I guess is what I'm saying. But you're right. I mean, I definitely think it has helped grow MarketingProfs as a Twitter presence. But I started the Ann Handley one a couple of years ago, mostly just as a way to squat on it, you know, just so that nobody else would take it. And here we are, you know, so many years later, and I do feel a little bit like a split personality sometimes, having the two personas to maintain. But you know, for me, the way that I balance that is that you know, in the Ann Handley piece, I do share a lot of personal stuff. You know, not incredibly personalized, but you know, definitely a little bit more personal than I do on the MarketingProfs handle. So that's kind of the way that I manage it.
So you've had, just to shift gears just a little bit, and we've got a lot of questions coming in, so eventually I'm going to have to flip over here to give everybody a chance to ask all these. But I'm just curious, as somebody who obviously you're doing a lot. You're obviously writing, you're thinking, you're running a successful business. Your business is in an area that's a tough one to manage with all the moving parts that you have. How do you organize yourself to be successful alongside the business? How are you structured to make it all work?
You mean balancing, you know, the books and MarketingProfs and all that other stuff? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have fantastic team at MarketingProfs, and MarketingProfs is not all me, despite what I think what the impression is often. There's an amazing group of people. MarketingProfs is 40 people. You know, MarketingProfs is full of people who passionate and talented and just so awesome and amazing, just not as out there as I am. And so, you know, credit really for a lot of the success of MarketingProfs goes to my colleagues at MarketingProfs. But all the content there is under me, and the way that I kind of balance it is I work a lot of hours is one thing. I work a lot of weekend downtime hours, you know, on my personal stuff. You know, the way that I wrote Everybody Writes was getting up early and staying up late and working a lot of weekends, you know, it's all day Saturday, Sunday over the course of about 3 months or so. It's exhausting, but it's something that I felt like I had to do. So I do a lot of things like that just on my own time. You know, there's no magic to it. I wish that I had a better solution. I wish that I could say, oh, well, I use this tool and it allows me to, you know, to be, 75% more efficient than it would be otherwise. But it's not that way at all. I mean, the truth is, I always feel like I'm scattered, and I always feel like I'm chasing something. But that's also, I've realized, the way that I tend to operate best. I get bored super easily, you know, and so the idea of being bored to me is worse than being too busy. So, so I think I've sort of done that to myself. I've structured my life that way, and that's okay. I think, you know, a lot of our friends are very similar. I've had this conversation with lots of people, and, you know, I think there is a certain kind of personality that does sort of operate at this kind of frantic pace all the time. It's just, you know, how we do it.
It's funny because you're describing a frantic pace with a lot of. You know, I always admit that I'm ADD to anybody who asks. Whether I am or not, I don't know if I am, but I think I am. So but at the same time, to sit down and focus on something like writing, like you can't just piece something together that's good. I think you really have to sit down and, I mean, you really want to focus on the core of it and stop and like really focus on it. But then the rest of it you're describing is so, you know. It's so much ADD, so much going on, so many moving parts. So it's kind of interesting the stop and the starts and where to focus and when not to, and how you manage all that.
Yeah, like for me, it's not really about ADD as much as it is just about I don't know. It's just the A part of it. You know, I just feel like I always have to be focusing on something. It's not that I feel that, you know, I'm constantly stopping and starting. Like when I think of ADD, I think of somebody who's like, ooh, shiny, you know, and suddenly they're done. You know, that's not me. For me, it's just about, you know, having so much stuff going on in my life that it feels very full, you know, and I've always operated that way. This isn't something that has been brought about by the digital age or by social media or this always-on mentality. I've always been on. I mean, that's just always the way it was. You know, when I was a kid, I used to keep a jar in my room. And in my downtime, you know, I used to write down things to do just in case I ever got bored, because I was always terrified of being bored. So I would just go over to my little jar and pick something out and it would tell me what to do, like, you know, I don't know, write a song or, you know, learn to play the guitar. I mean, like really, really silly things like that. But I've always been that way. I just think it's my personality.
So how about for what do you suggest for people that? It's funny because actually a couple weeks ago I had the pleasure of speaking to a student audience at San Jose State here in San Jose, and it was one of my favorite speaking engagements because they were all bright-eyed and ready to go, and like their careers were just upon them, and they were like, the one question they asked me that I answered, I don't know if I would say it the same way again or not, but it was how would you go about getting a job right now? My response was to start writing.
I was just going to pick that.
like blog. But here's the thing. They all didn't, that wasn't enough for them. And that's why I think I'd answer it differently, because how do you just start? And I can't remember how I started blogging, but I somehow did. How would you tell somebody who isn't blogging that they should how to start doing it?
I would just say focus on the audience that you want to attract, and maybe that audience is only the attention of a particular industry or a particular company. But really start focusing on not just the platform itself on blogging, which implies that you're focusing on expression, right? But really focusing on flipping it a little bit, focusing on what do you have to say about your industry or the audience, writing for a particular audience. I think that's the key in my mind. I tell my kids this all the time. My kids are one's in high school and one's just out of college. And if you want to get attention, the way to get a job is not to just send out resumes, but it's to, it's the whole inbound method, right, of just giving yourself that voice, giving yourself permission to have that voice, and then, just start saying it. What's incumbent in there, of course, is to, doing the research piece of it, getting familiar with who the players are in your industry, what the key issues are, participating in social channels so you are able to build those connections with people. All that stuff is inherent. So I don't think it's just about writing, although I think it starts there. I also think that it has to do with engaging and sharing and giving back.
Well, I definitely believe in sharing.
I've heard that.
I'm going to jump over to some questions because we've got a lot of them.
Okay.
This first one is, sorry if I say your name wrong, Cheval. What is the best way to overcome writer's block if you are facing the challenge of producing great content?
So I don't actually believe in writer's block. I don't really think it's a real thing. I mean, in my mind, when people have writer's block, what they really have is thinking block. They haven't thought something through enough to really have a point of view or know what they want to say about something. So I would say, first of all, figure out what is it that's stopping you from writing. So maybe it is more of a thinking problem. Maybe you do have thinker's block and writer's block. But the other thing is that I think there's a fear of the blank page can be a real thing, but I don't think that's writer's block. I think that's just fear of the blank page. So I think there's lots of ways around that. You could try dictating the first draft of a blog post. There's lots of people that Bryan and I know who produce their first draft that way, maybe because it feels more conversational to just speak than to write. Or maybe just because it's easier. People don't get speaker's block as much as they say they get writer's block. So that's a good way to do it. And then to use something like a rev.com or a speech pad or something like that to transcribe. Casting words is another one. There's all kinds of really easy, inexpensive solutions to get what you've spoken as a first draft back and then edit it into something else.
What do you think of alcohol? Let's just dive right in.
I'm a big fan of alcohol, Bryan, as you know. I produce these, this whole, it's probably backwards, right? Drunk. So if all else fails, just start drinking. Pretty much my advice.
There's nothing like a glass of wine that gets me writing.
That's so funny. I actually am the opposite. It's like a glass of wine or a beer. Like sometimes it'll offer that sort of writing lubrication, but for me, a lot of times it just makes me like that's actually, you know what I should do? I should try doing a spoken first draft with a glass of wine or beer.
That would be interesting.
It tends to make me a little bit more loquacious. So
How about
and the idea, like I'm almost allergic to the idea of actually dictating the first draft because that's not how my brain works. That's not how I'm wired. So for me, I need that blank piece of paper or something that feels safer about that. So maybe just as an experiment, I'll try that. You've inspired me to try that.
Well, if you could try Red Bull and vodka, I'd like to see how that turns out.
Wow, I would like to see how that turns out. A lot of people probably.
So here's the next question from J.S. Gilbert. Ann, what percentage of the content out there would you actually refer to as, in quotes, good? My thought is that it's probably 5% or less.
Wow. It's interesting, like all the content in the world is good content. I don't know, actually just the number that just popped into my head was more like 25%, but now I'm wondering, am I just too entirely optimistic? I mean, I will say that, just looking at business content, like the content that I read every day, actually a lot of it is actually, it's so much better than it was, say, a couple of years ago. So it could just be that I'm really just want to be incredibly optimistic. businesses embrace the idea of good content, which is good content. But I don't know, 5% feels really harsh.
Yeah.
I don't know how we'd ever make, honestly.
Yeah, that'd be hard.
I'm getting a lot
It's
of
gotta be.
feedback.
It's a gut feel for sure.
Yeah.
Are
you getting feedback?
Am I getting feedback?
Yeah, from me. Yeah, from me.
Tiny bit. Yeah.
I can hear it suddenly.
But I can hear what you're saying. Let's see. Maya says we are getting some feedback suddenly, so we'll just work through it. We'll see if it goes away. Jack has a question for you. He said, "How much does personality and passion play in content when capturing an audience through all the noise?"
Yeah, I think it's actually. Yeah, I still hear that.
Let me.
Try my
I'm gonna.
Now I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay.
There we go.
How's that?
I can still hear myself. Got it. All right, I'm going to respond to Jack. I think it's huge, actually. I think, it's that old saying that, no one will care about what you have to say until they know that you care. So I think having a passion for what you're writing about is important. There's everything that you could say has probably been said, in one word is being said by somebody else as you're saying it. So I think all you have as a differentiator is how you say something. I do think that having the ability to create content at a point of view, a personality, a tone of voice, as I call it, a brand voice, if you're working for a bigger organization, I think that's everything. Again, I think it's a really undervalued piece of content marketing and general. That's a lot better.
It seems to be muting me seems to be the trick. Maybe it's on my end. I think I have talker's block. Okay, so Michael Townsend said, "Should content be what the author believes to be true or what the audience thinks is true?"
I just think it should be true, period. I think what's throwing me off is that word true. I think it should be, I think it should just reflect the truth, period, is how I think about it. But who should it please, I guess, is how I think about it. How should it be pitched? It should be pitched toward the audience. So, when you're talking about, your own products and services, you don't talk about what they do. You talk about what they do for the customer, for your prospect, for the audience. And so I guess that's how I would answer that. I think, you should always tell the truth, your own truth, and so I'm not sure I understand the difference between truth for you versus truth for your audience.
Well, I would can you hear me okay, by the way? I just switched to my headphone.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I would also, there's a whole conversation there around columnists versus bloggers, and more, and this may not be what he intended, but I always, wonder about the facts and the the research that went into some blogs versus paid columnists and even paid bloggers that are that spend a quality amount of time really putting the right research and the right facts into an article.
Is that a question? Or that was an observation?
So let's move to J.S. Gilmore.
I will say that I do think it's important to research. There's a lot of bloggers out there still who don't think about research as part of their job, and so in my mind, I do think finding out what else has been said, really grounding whatever you're saying, not just in what I've said before, but more importantly, in wrapping some data around it and getting as close as you can to the source, the ultimate source of that data. and looking for credible sources of data too. You know, I see a lot of blog posts who are relying on second or third data, misquoted from somebody else, but they don't take it back to the original source. So seek out that original source, and you might find that it's been sort of misinterpreted unintentionally along the way. And then the second thing is, you know, just to try to find best sources that you can. You know, I always look for reputable sources like New York Times or the Washington Post, or these sort of quasi-agencies like Pew Research, for example, ones that are sort of recognized as being sources of data or information. And if you only are relying on data that's produced by, say, you know, a PR company on behalf of, you know, a client or something like that, you know, that's fine. That doesn't mean that it's not reputable, but it does mean that you should at least be aware of potential agenda or ties, and you should disclose it as much. And so I guess in my mind, you know, that's telling the truth. You know, I think really just revealing as much as you can, you know, and really digging in a little bit. I do think that's really important. And I don't feel that way because I believe that, you know, social has any imperative. I just think it's because as human beings we sort of owe as much to one another. So why not? You know, I mean, the beauty of the internet is that it's all right there. Why wouldn't you seek it out? Why wouldn't you pull it into the story? Because it's relevant.
Yeah, my 10-year-old came to me the other night and said that he had paralyzed dream disorder, and I'm like, how do you have that? And he's like, I Googled it. I couldn't figure out why in the middle of the night my dreams were waking me up and I was scared. And I'm like, so you have paralyzed dream disorder? And he goes, yeah, but here's the good news. I Googled a solution for it, and now and all you have to do is this thing, and you meditate, and then it disappears. I'm like, so you're okay now? And he goes, yeah, I'm fine. Okay, sounds good. So there is content out there for everybody.
I've never even heard of that. That's amazing.
and yeah, there's so much, like, you know, obviously when you go to the medical side, that can get a little scary, but so
I thought you were going to say, and all I have to do is buy this like juice cleanse program for, you know, $120 a month for the next 12 months, and I'll be all set.
I wouldn't put it past him. He comes up with all kinds of weird stuff. So Brian Fonzo had a question. Our good friend Brian. He said, curious if Ann feels brands and leaders must change the story they tell to engage millennials, or just how and where.
Whether they should change the story they tell to engage millennials. No, I don't think so. I mean, I do think that, you know, if you are looking to engage millennials, there are probably some, and depending on the story you're trying to tell and the brand that you're trying to tell the story on behalf of, I think there are platforms that you should look into, like Instagram, for example. You know, my kids are huge into Instagram. So I think really seeking out the places where they exist and then tailoring the story that you're telling accordingly. So obviously if you're using Instagram, the story. But I think ultimately, you know, the story doesn't change as much as your way of telling it and how you're going to tell it. So I don't know if you'd have a perspective on that, Brian. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think, so yeah, we'll just move on. No, I'm kidding. So I think anytime you try to change something, it's not, I mean, I know this is one of the clichéest words we could use right now, but it's not authentic when you try to change something to benefit the audience. So I would never want to change something to get to attach or connect with an audience. I'd probably attach myself to somebody who spoke their language maybe a little bit more. And like I'd ask Brian if he would come on to a chat and start talking with the millennials versus me trying to talk like one. You know, so that seems a little more authentic and real than me trying to change the story. So
right.
I tend to agree.
Or you see a lot of brands doing that, like on like on YouTube, for example. It used to be that these YouTubers were sort of, they had these massive audiences on YouTube that was a little bit outside of the culture, right? And now so many brands have tapped into that, and they're tapping the audiences that these YouTubers have built, and then just sort of like more so. So, there's lots of great examples of that, just similar to what we're talking about.
Yeah. Good. We're going to keep rolling here.
Okay.
The next one is from Julie. Where do you and your colleagues find inspiration and insights that shape your content development efforts?
Yeah, I get ideas from everywhere. Like I was saying, I don't know if you heard at the beginning, Julie, when I showed my field notes, but this has tons of great ideas with them in notebooks. When I see something that I think is interesting, that sort of makes my, I don't know how to say this, it sort of makes my pulse quicken a little bit, which sounds it sounds a little goofy, I know, but it's like, it is an instinct that you develop. That's like, yeah, I could use that someday. And even if I think that that's something that ultimately could be relevant to my audience or to an audience somewhere, I'll just sort of write it down. It's a matter of training myself to first notice it, and then secondly having the discipline to just record it somewhere, so that it's accessible to me, because I'll forget it instantly otherwise. And so I think that's it. I think a lot of it has to do with just putting yourself into that mindset. The designer Michael Wolff says, what already exists is an inspiration, and I think about that all the time. I think about that when I'm stumped for ideas. If I can't flip through this and see something that suddenly just, it's probably something incredibly ordinary, but I wrote it down because it made me think of something that might be relevant to my audience. So I think it's a matter of just tuning yourself to look for those things, and then writing them down, and then just spinning them a little bit and sharing.
Do you have a degree in this? Is this what you went to school for? Is writing, or?
Yes, I thought you did. I have a degree in field notes. That's no. Yeah,
I have a degree in Evernote. So.
Yeah, I have a degree in Evernote. Oh my God, I have like an anti-degree in Evernote. Yeah, no, I went to school. I went to journalism school, and I also, so I have a degree in English and also in journalism, because the thing is, I always wanted to be a journalist, but the truth is I'm not a very good journalist, because I'm actually my heart is more of a storyteller's heart. And so, I used to work at the Boston Globe, one of my first jobs out of school, because of journalism. I was to work at the Globe, actually not straight out of school, but within a couple of years. And my editor kept handing me back pieces that I turned in at the time, and they were just, he's like, too long. You only have like 4 inches, to tell this story. And I'm like, what? I'm like just warming up, So I always had this tension within me of wanting to tell a bigger story and putting it into a bigger context. And even now, I write blog posts that are probably way more bloated than so many other posts out there. It's because I think there's a lot of relevant detail that I want to include, that I think really for me is my voice, So I think it's kind of my philosophy about content is sort of one from in part from my English world, from my literary world, and in part from my journalism.
I'm trying to balance between my questions and theirs, because I've got more questions for you, but I'll bounce back. I'll come back over to mine later. So Julie, sorry, Wahiba. Hopefully I'm saying that right. How do you make sure that your brand has a consistent online identity when your social media accounts are managed by different people?
That's a tough one. You really got to get things on the same page. My biggest recommendation is, if you have this decentralized approach to managing your content and your social, is to create a style guide, which I know sounds like an incredibly boring thing to do, but it doesn't have to be. I think it's just a matter of picking one of the style guides that's out there, like a Chicago Manual style or an AP style book. Yahoo style guide is a really good one, and then adding to it, either through in a place that's accessible, like a Google Doc, or keeping it in Basecamp, or someplace where everybody has access to it, And just adding on to that, like just some basics around your brand. So this is what we sound like. This is the voice that we write in. I think that the most effective way to do that is to think of like 3 things that really do define your company. So leave out things like truthful and friendly and reliable. Like all that stuff is table stakes, right? Any company should be that. But really think about, think deeply about what are the 3 elements that might define your brand, so your voice. Are you snarky, for example? Are you clever? Are you knowledgeable? I had an interview last week with a company who I think is doing some super fun stuff, and one of their and they're an agency, so in one of their words was what is it? Creatively weird. And I love that because it's like, it was just like, it just sort of told you immediately, okay, so if something, like whatever we're producing has to have an element of creatively weird to it, at least it can't be in conflict with that. So come up with your 3 words. I talk about this all the time, or I have been lately. Something, again, I think a lot of companies don't do, but it's an exercise that you set your heart. So once you sort of have that, write it down somewhere, write it down in a place that's accessible, and keep adding to it. Keep adding to that Google Doc or in Dropbox or wherever it is that you keep it, and then start to build, an approach that conveys the tone of voice that you're trying to, have everybody keep.
So I've got another question for me, and then we've got just a couple more. My question for you is what when you're writing, how do you balance wordplay from telling the story, like creative writing, as you're going through it? Because you talk about in your book like different things like using adverbs and weakling verbs and how you're structuring and things like that versus just telling the story. Like where's the balance there of the difference between journalism and creative writing? Where do you sit?
Right. I think of what I do, and actually this is true of a lot of magazines too, is sort of a creative nonfiction. And that's why I was always had a hard time fitting into the true journalism world, because my approach was always a little bit more creative. I always wanted to enhance the story a little bit more with lots of color that you really don't get in journalism. So most of the things that I produce now is sort of the genre I would pitch it into. That's the same writing at a much higher and more polished level that you see, like, let's say, the New York. Sorry, I'm just going to turn off my Skype so that's not happening. Sorry. Sorry, that just distracted me. So that's the way I balance it. So I tell the story first, and just for me, it's become part of my process. So I'll just, as I mentioned earlier, when I'm putting together that laundry list, I'll sort of write all that stuff down, and then for me, a lot of the creative elements, the humor, the asides, the witticisms, all that stuff that I think of as style, all that is added on the rewrite. I add all that after the fact. So to me, the most important thing is get the story down. That's the journalist to me. But then I can't leave it like that, because my storytelling heart comes in over here and says, well, we could make this a whole lot more fun, a whole lot more engaging, and a whole lot more interesting to read if we added all this other stuff. So that's the way that I balance it. I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Yeah, it totally did. I have a journalism degree as well, and I had teachers that always used to make me structure my sentences, and especially like the headline, like how short it had to be.
Yes.
And I was like, kill me now.
Right.
Because I think it's really, I definitely veered towards the creative aspect and over the factual, structured aspect. So, I definitely identify with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with it. That's in part why I wanted to write Everybody Writes as well, because a lot of people haven't taken a writing course since college, sometimes since high school, you know, my daughter's in high school, and the way that she's taught how to write is that traditional 5-paragraph essay. You know, your opening argument, your point number 1, your point number 2, your point number 3, your close. And it's like, it's crazy to me because there is no one way to write. I think it's much more interesting if you think of the fact that there are many different ways to write, many different ways to tell a story and to excite people. That how to tell that story is really interests me. And so I wanted to give people permission to know that it doesn't have to be, you know, 5-paragraph essay. Everyone wants to read that. It's not that interesting, other than apparently high school English teachers. So.
Right.
Now I'm going to get letters from high school English teachers.
So Susie, who's actually fielding questions, popped her own question into the midst of all this. Said, how do you measure successful content performance? Do you want comments on your site, which is that's a conversation unto itself. Shares, engagements with tweets. What's your measure for success on content performance?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes to all of those things. It really depends on you know, what your goal is anyway with your content. But for me personally, you know, how do I think about the success of a piece of content that I'm putting together, like a blog post, for example? I always look at social shares. I mean, I look at page views and, you know, time on site and all that other kind of stuff to give me a sort of sense of, you know, how things are trending on the site and whether this was a particular post that resonated with the folks I wanted to resonate with. But I always look at shares because to me there's nothing more significant than that, in the sense that, and I know you'll agree with this, in the sense that, you know, if someone is willing to share something for you, if they're willing to sort of like plant a flag, you know, in your camp and say, you know, I love this so much that I want to share it with everybody around me. I mean, they're essentially, you know, saying this is important and here's, you know, you should see this. And so I do think that that's a really significant, I don't know, it's a signal that I think is really important in comms.
Mm-hmm. So just one more question, then I promise I'll let you go. What do you think is next for you in the next few years? How do you keep creative and you know, I know you have a lot going on, but you seem like the type of person who always has something kind of, you know, the next thing that maybe keeps you creative. What is that for you?
That's a good question. I mean, the thing about our work, the thing about my work anyway, is that I never quite feel like a master. You know, it's like, I mean, I think I'm a decent writer. I don't think I'm a great writer. I'd like to be a great writer. You know, it's like, I think I'm a good speaker. I don't think I'm a great speaker, and I would like to be a great speaker. Like, other people might call me a great writer or a great speaker, but, you know, it's a little like calling yourself, you know, a great parent. You know, it's like, you don't. It's only meaningful when other people say it to you, and so, or when other people say it about you. You know, so I don't know. I'm just like, that's why I love this industry that I'm in, because I feel like I'm always getting better. I'm always iterating. You know, it's like, you know, if you look at any author over 20 years or 30 years, you know, you can see or artist, any artist. You can see a vast difference between where they began and where they started. Where they started and where they ended up. You know, if you read really Hemingway, it's very different than the later Hemingway. So I think that's true of us all. You know, and I think as long as I'm always growing and improving, then that's what's interesting to me. In terms of how do I get there, I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. I guess I'm just like, I am so excited by, you know, what's going on in business generally. You know, I think that the opportunity there is still so vast to really give companies the tools and the inspiration to tell stories. Like, that interests me a lot. And so I continue to be really challenged and inspired by this. I think we've seen some amazing examples of storytelling. We've also seen some really good. So, you know, I think you know, the more that I see, the more that I get interested in it. And I don't know, and then just you know, I don't know what my next book will be. I don't know what my next big project will be. There's nothing right now that I'm still recovering from the last one, so there's nothing right now that's, you know, I'm saying, yes, that's definitely a direction I'm going to. you know, the time between Content Rules and Everybody Writes was almost 5 years. And, you know, for me, that the postpartum lasts that long. It's like I need that long to get over the last baby before I can think about having the next one.
Yeah.
So that's how I function. The other thing is I will say is that I never want to write a book. I never wanted to write Content Rules. Really, I never wanted to write a book. Right? And the only reason to write a book, in my mind, is when you can't not write it. And so there's nothing right now that I think I can't not write. And when I hear that, you know, like, I will like put it in field notes, and then I'll know that that's the next thing.
Yeah. Well, congrats on the book and everything that's happened, and
Thank you.
And for everything that you do. I appreciate it, and I read and watch and listen to everything that you do, and love your work.
Likewise, congrats to you, and I love everything that you do. So
thank you.
It's such a joy to be here with you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And to everyone out there who joined us today, thank you for all your great questions and for joining another H2H chat. We'll see you next Monday. Until then, Ann, appreciate it. We'll see you soon, and feel free to drop into the tweet chat community. You'll see a ton of tweets there waiting for you.
Cool.
And we will sign off now and say to everybody, cheers. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Great.